3 kids, same parents, same house, same photographers waiting outside the same school gates every September. And yet, anyone who's watched them for more than 5 minutes on a palace balcony walks away with 3 completely different impressions. One stands like he's already rehearsing for the crown. One quietly polices everyone else's posture. One can't stop making faces at the cameras. The differences aren't a rumor or a tabloid invention. They show up on camera, in classrooms, and in the choices Prince William and Kate Middleton have made for each child individually. This is the story of how 3 siblings raised in the same nursery turned into 3 entirely different people, and why that might matter more for the monarchy than anyone's willing to say out loud yet. Let's get into it. Prince George is 13 now, and this past week he wasn't in Windsor at all. He was on the eve of the biggest change of his young life. 9 months from now, in September 2026, he trades the co-ed prep school. He's known since 2022 for Eton College, the boys' boarding school attended by both his father and his uncle, Prince Harry. That single fact tells you almost everything about what makes George different from his siblings before he's even said a word. His sister and brother aren't going with him. For the first time in his life, George is stepping into something entirely alone. That's been the pattern his whole childhood, actually. While Charlotte and Louis have grown up mostly shielded from individual scrutiny, George has spent the last 2 years being quietly, deliberately introduced to the job that's waiting for him. In May 2025, he made what royal watchers immediately flagged as a landmark appearance, joining his parents at a Buckingham Palace tea party for World War II veterans, an event a palace insider had already described as part of a broader, massive balancing act in raising a future monarch. He didn't just stand there for photos either. He asked former service members thoughtful questions about U-boats and flight missions, the kind of specific, engaged curiosity that royal editor Russell Myers called the first sign of George taking on future duties. Compare that to Charlotte and Louis's public appearances at that same age, and the gap is obvious. They wave, they smile, they occasionally cause chaos on a balcony. George asks about U-boats. There's a reason for that, and it's not accidental. A source close to the family told Closer that Prince William and Kate have done their level best to let George have as normal a childhood as possible, but it's now time to start the preparations. Adding that with George turning 13, you can feel a real shift happening with him. Royal author Katie Nicholl has framed this even more bluntly, telling reporters that William understands the public needs to fall in love with George as a youngster, long before he ever wears a crown. That's not parenting. That's succession planning dressed up as parenting. And it's happening to George specifically, not to his siblings. Go back further, and you can see how long this has been building. At King Charles's coronation in 2023, George was the only one of his siblings given an actual ceremonial role, serving as one of 4 pages of honor for his grandfather inside Westminster Abbey. Charlotte and Louis watched from the pews. George stood at the altar. Even as a child, the line between heir and siblings of the heir was already being drawn in front of millions of viewers. And it's not just ceremonial. There are logistics now built entirely around protecting George's specific place in the succession. When he turned 12 in the summer of 2025, palace protocol shifted so that George would be advised not to travel on the same plane as his father, preserving the line of succession in case of disaster. Nobody's drawing up separate flight plans for Charlotte or Louis. That rule exists for exactly one child in that family, because exactly one child is going to be king. None of this happened overnight either. It's the product of a very specific approach William has taken since George was a toddler. Back in 2016, when George wasn't yet 3, William told the BBC that within his family unit, they consider themselves a normal family. That was the founding idea. Normalcy first. Duty introduced gradually and only when necessary. For nearly a decade, that's exactly what happened. George went to Montessori, then Thomas's Battersea, then Lambrook alongside his siblings, largely indistinguishable in the press from any other uniformed schoolboy. But normal has an expiration date when you're the future King of England, and George's expired sometime around his 12th birthday Royal expert Robert Jobson noted at the end of 2025 that all three Wales children had shown growth that year, but he singled George out specifically, saying George, Charlotte, and Louis show poise at public appearances, while noting Charlotte and Louis have developed a natural ease at events. George has grown increasingly self-assured in a way that's specifically tied to his future kingship, not just to getting older. Then came the summer of 2026's Trooping the Color, and something else became visible: the emotional cost sitting underneath all this training. Louis, as always, stole the visual spotlight with his antics on the balcony, but it was George, watching his little brother mimic their grandfather's every move, who briefly cracked a real smile before catching himself and returning to composure. That single unscripted second says more about George's daily reality than any palace briefing could. He's the one who has to catch himself. His siblings don't. Which brings us to the school question, because that's where this divergence stops being subtle and starts being structural. For 4 years, George, Charlotte, and Louis have all attended the exact same institution, Lambrook School in Berkshire, a co-educational prep school the family moved to when they relocated from Kensington Palace to Windsor in 2022. Royal author Sally Bedell Smith has called that decision genuinely unusual for the family, telling people it reflects William wanting to do things in a more modern way by putting all three children in one school, something she described as groundbreaking for the institution. That shared chapter is ending. George entered his final year of primary school at Lambrook in September 2025, and by the time this video is airing, he's mere weeks from walking through Eton's gates without either sibling beside him for the first time in his school life. Former BBC royal correspondent Jenny Bond has warned that the shift could be harder on George than it ever was on his father, precisely because, unlike William, who found boarding school a kind of escape, George has been raised in a household full of love and harmony, which makes leaving it that much stranger. So here's where part 1 leaves us. George is being built, deliberately and visibly, into someone separate from his siblings. Trained, tested, sent off alone. That's one kind of different. But it raises an immediate question about the two kids he's leaving behind at Lambrook. If George is being shaped by duty, what's shaping Charlotte and Louis? Because whatever it is, it's producing two personalities that look nothing alike, and nothing like George's either. If George is the sibling built for the spotlight of a single job, Charlotte is the sibling built for control of the room around her. And she's been demonstrating that instinct since she was barely old enough to walk a red carpet. Start with the most recent example, because it's the clearest at the 80th anniversary commemoration of VE Day in May 2025. The family stood together on the Buckingham Palace balcony, and while Louis fidgeted and George settled into practiced stillness, Charlotte did something neither of her brothers did. She managed them. A royal source described the scene to Marie Claire, noting that Charlotte stood serenely like an old pro and shot a warning look at Louis during the balcony appearance. That's not a 10-year-old enjoying a big day out. That's a supervisor on duty. It's not a one-time thing either. Royal expert Jenny Bond told The Mirror that Charlotte keeps a watchful eye on her little brother to make sure he's behaving at royal events, though Bond was quick to add, with some amusement, that Charlotte isn't always successful. Body language expert Judy James picked up on exactly the same behavior years earlier, during the Platinum Jubilee celebrations, describing how Charlotte was quietly and calmly on patrol, correcting her brother's performances throughout the event. James went further, noting that Charlotte had physically pushed Louis's hands down when he waved too enthusiastically, stopped him from putting his fingers in his mouth, and even subtly corrected George when his arms weren't positioned properly during the national anthem. Read that list again. She corrected both of her brothers, including the future king, in the same afternoon. That's not bossiness for its own sake either, according to the people who study her closest. James specifically noted that Charlotte's ability to enforce the rules comes paired with real empathy. She's also the go-to choice for hugs from Louis when he needs comfort, which is a very different skill set than simple rule enforcement. So where does this come from? Part of it is almost certainly birth order, and it's worth pausing on the mechanics of that because it explains a lot about why all three kids ended up so different despite an identical upbringing. Child psychologist Laura, speaking to Hello, laid out the theory plainly. Firstborns, like George, tend toward conscientiousness and leadership because they're treated as role models from day one. But as the middle child, Charlotte's role is less clearly defined, which tends to make middle children more adaptable and socially perceptive. She's not the one everyone's watching to become king, and she's not the baby everyone's indulging. She's the one who has to read the room because nobody's defined her role for her. That's arguably exactly what's produced The Balcony Supervisor. It's not just performance under pressure either. People who've actually lived inside the household back this up. Caroline Redgrave, who worked as the family's nanny for 5 years, told The Sun that nighttime routines revealed each child's true personality. And in that quieter setting, George gravitated toward building blocks while Charlotte could usually be found reading a book, and Louis liked playing with stuffed toys. Redgrave described all three kids as fundamentally polite, playful, and full of personality. But the specific hobbies she flagged track exactly with the public personas. George building, Charlotte reading and reasoning, Louis playing pretend. There's a generational echo here too, and royal watchers have noticed it. Historian Robert Hardman, author of a biography of King Charles, said of Charlotte that you can definitely see traits of her great-grandmother in her. Practical common sense, not camera-grabbing, but solid and responsible, a direct nod to the late Queen Elizabeth II. A palace source went even further to people, describing Charlotte as a strong character, almost wise beyond her years, while noting that despite the composure, she's still capable of letting loose like any other little girl her age. That last point matters, because Charlotte isn't a miniature adult. She's genuinely sporty, apparently inheriting her mother's athleticism, with a palace source telling reporters she is clearly sporty like her mother. A bit of a mini-me. She's also notably a Taylor Swift fan who does ballet and tap, interests that connect her to her late grandmother Princess Diana more than to the Queen. When Charlotte met Swift and the Kelce brothers at an Eras Tour stop in London, Travis Kelce called her a superstar, and his brother Jason said she was the highlight of meeting the royal family. Proof that whatever composure she projects on a palace balcony, she's still a kid who lit up meeting a pop star. At home, according to her own mother, that authority isn't performance at all, it's just how the household runs. Kate has said that in Adelaide Cottage, Charlotte is known as the one in charge, presiding over movie nights, homemade pizza evenings, and cake decorating, with the same quiet command she brings to a state occasion. And it's not just informal household stuff. Charlotte's been managing her brothers at genuinely solemn state events for years. At Queen Elizabeth's funeral in 2022, she discreetly told George when to bow, which means the future king needed his little sister's cue to get the moment right. Think about that dynamic for a second. The heir to the throne taking direction from the middle child in front of the entire world. That single detail is the real hinge of this whole story. George is being trained for the top job. Charlotte, without any formal title pushing her forward, has quietly made herself the family's unofficial stage manager, correcting kings-in-waiting and cheeky little brothers alike, whether anyone assigned her that role or not. But there's a term for what her position actually is in the family, and it's not a flattering one. Royal commentators have started calling both Charlotte and Louis the Spares, and that framing, once you hear it, changes how you see everything that happens next. What does it mean to be the Spares' spare? And what happens to the family's most chaotic personality when he's the one furthest from the crown, with nothing structurally expected of him at all? If George carries the weight of the crown and Charlotte carries the weight of keeping everyone in line, Louis carries almost nothing. And that absence of pressure has turned him into the most purely entertaining royal in a generation. Start where everyone else starts, the Platinum Jubilee balcony in 2022. Louis was 4 years old, and in the space of a single afternoon, he became a global meme. He waved to the crowd, made funny faces, and covered his ears during the noisy flypast. while standing directly beside the Queen, and one image of him yelling with his hands clamped over his ears took off across social media within hours. That wasn't a one-off overwhelmed toddler moment either. According to Mike Tyndall, whose wife Zara is William's cousin, Louis's antics that day had a very specific explanation. The young prince had complete sugar highs during the pageant after consuming sweets behind the scenes. Later that same weekend, seated in the royal box for the pageant itself, Louis reportedly gestured energetically throughout the event, put his fingers in his ears, threw a cushion around, and at one point clamped his hand over his own mother's mouth before eventually abandoning his seat altogether to go sit with his grandfather instead. He was 5 and doing it again at Charles's coronation in 2023. Louis made his opinion of the multi-hour ceremony extremely clear without saying a word. Cameras caught him yawning openly during the service, and pulling faces cameras couldn't help but capture. It became such a running theme that royal outlets started compiling his expressions into standing galleries, describing how Louis let the world know just how much of a snooze fest he thought his grandfather's coronation was, from a visible stank face walking into Westminster Abbey to unimpressed waves from the balcony afterward. And he hasn't slowed down at the June 2026 Trooping the Color. Now 8 years old, Louis once again became the day's most discussed royal. Not William, not Kate, not even George. Social media lit up with the same affection it's shown him every year, with fans writing that he was just living his best life, and pointing out that his signature cheekiness was, in one commenter's words, still very much alive. Another described his expression during that day's flypast as pure joy and zero filter, arguably the single best description anyone's ever given of what Louis brings to these events, that his siblings simply don't. He's evolved too, not out of the antics, but into new versions of them. At the 2025 Trooping the Color, observers noticed Louis had started actively studying his family's behavior rather than just reacting to noise and crowds. He was seen mimicking his brother George's facial expressions in one moment, and in another, emulating his grandfather King Charles's exact movements, repeatedly glancing back at the monarch to copy him. That's a different kind of funny than the 4-year-old covering his ears. It's a 7-year-old who's clearly paying close attention to the adults around him and turning it into comedy anyway. George, notably, was the one seen telling him to knock it off as the family exited the balcony that day, while Louis just kept right on waving until he was physically out the door. None of this seems to be an act that fades in private either. It's just who he is. The family's former nanny described him at home as the sibling drawn to stuffed toys and imaginative play, consistent with the youngest child profile experts keep assigning him. Child psychologist Laura's read on birth order applies most cleanly to Louis of all 3 kids. Youngest siblings are frequently associated with creativity, sociability, and humor, and Laura added a line about Louis specifically that royal watchers love to quote, noting he has that trait in abundance. Even his sister's own corrective instincts back this reading up. Charlotte doesn't discipline Louis because he's malicious or out of control in any troubling way. She does it because he's a kid who genuinely doesn't yet care about decorum, and someone in that family has decided that's charming rather than a problem. That's the real difference underneath all the viral photos, and it circles back directly to the spare framing from Part 2. Louis is 4th in line to the throne as of 2026, behind his father, his brother, and his sister. That distance from the succession isn't just a number. Royal commentators argue it's functionally freeing. Christopher Anderson, a royal biographer, told Harper's Bazaar that William and Kate lavish equal attention on all 3 children while nurturing their distinct personalities. But he added something sharper about what that distance actually buys Louis and Charlotte: the ability to share the weight of being spares so neither has to carry it entirely alone. Robert Jobson has been blunter about what that hierarchy actually means in practical terms, telling one outlet flatly that the second son and second daughter don't get anywhere near that kind of attention or resources, that the heir does, adding that a lot of the family dynamic comes down to money, hierarchy, and the simple fact that someone has to be the one in charge eventually. It's a blunt way of putting it, but it explains why Louis can get away with sticking his fingers in his mouth. On a palace balcony, while George has to keep his arms perfectly still for the anthem. One of them will be judged for the rest of his life on his composure. The other one, for now, is just a kid at a parade. That's precisely the arrangement Jenny Bond flagged when discussing William and Kate's parenting philosophy more broadly. She said the couple are acutely aware of the problems a royal spare can face, a clear reference to the well-documented struggles of Prince Harry, and are deliberately trying to spread that burden between Charlotte and Louis, rather than let it concentrate on one child the way it did with William and his brother. So by the end of part 3, the picture is set. George is being built for a job neither of his siblings will ever hold. Charlotte has appointed herself the family's day-to-day enforcer without being asked. And Louis, freed by his distance from the throne, gets to just be the funny one, the pressure valve of the entire operation. 3 completely different roles, assigned less by explicit parenting, and more by where each kid happens to sit in the birth order and the succession. But roles assigned early in life don't stay static forever, and the biggest test of how different these 3 really are is about to arrive. Because for the first time since 2022, they're not all walking into the same school building together. For 4 years, whatever else separated George, Charlotte, and Louis, they had one thing tethering them together. Every weekday morning, Lambrook. Same driveway, same drop-off, same corridors. That's about to end, and the way it ends says almost as much about their differences as anything that's happened on a palace balcony. The family enrolled all 3 children at Lambrook in Berkshire back in 2022, when they relocated from Kensington Palace to their home in Windsor. It was, from the start, a decision that stood out from typical royal precedent. Sally Bedell Smith's observation about the family's approach bears repeating in this context. Putting all 3 kids in the same co-educational school was, in her words, a new direction, groundbreaking for the royal family. A deliberate break from generations of royal children being scattered across separate single-sex institutions. There was a practical reason nobody talks about much, too, buried in the family's own history. Kate herself missed one of these milestones the first time around, when George started at his previous school, Thomas's Battersea, back in 2017. Kate had to miss her son's first day entirely because she was suffering from severe morning sickness. While pregnant with Louis at the time, 2 years later, when Charlotte started at that same school, mother and father made sure to be there together, with William telling the school's head that his daughter was very excited about her first day. Those small logistical details, oddly enough, foreshadow exactly the personalities that would later emerge. George's early days were quiet and slightly nervous. Charlotte's were confident from the very first handshake. By September 2025, the 3 of them returned to Lambrook for what everyone already knew was their final year together. People magazine's coverage of that morning noted plainly that the academic year ahead would be the last that all 3 of William and Kate's children would be enrolled there together, with George set to age out of the co-ed prep school the following summer, as he turned 13 and moved towards secondary education. At the time, Eton was already being treated as the presumptive landing spot, William's own alma mater, and the same institution that shaped Harry. It's worth sitting with what that actually changes, structurally, for these 3 kids. Right now, they see each other constantly. Same runs to school, same pickup line, same rugby-watching evenings at home that William and Kate have reportedly prioritized over royal engagements whenever possible. Once George starts boarding at Eton, that daily overlap disappears. Charlotte and Louis will keep living at home in Windsor with their parents. George will be somewhere else entirely, coming home on breaks and the occasional weekend, transformed almost overnight from the oldest sibling in the house into someone who visits. Jenny Bond, speaking to the Mirror about this exact transition, drew a sharp contrast between how George is likely to experience boarding school versus how William did at the same age. William, she said, found being sent away from home to be something of a relief, a structured world separate from a complicated family situation. George doesn't have that same motivation. Bond put it plainly. things are very different for George, who has been brought up in a household full of love and harmony, which means the move away is likely to feel like a loss rather than an escape. She added that this first year would be a time for George to knuckle down and start studying for important exams and to enjoy his school life, while predicting his parents would keep shielding him from public exposure as long as they possibly can. That single detail is the clearest evidence yet of how differently this family is treating its 3 children. Charlotte and Louis get to stay in the same house, the same routines, the same protective bubble their parents have built around Windsor. George gets pulled out of it, not because he wants to be, but because that's what being second in line to the throne, soon to be heir apparent, has always required of the men in this family. And there's a specific reason the family is choosing now, at 13, rather than waiting. A source close to the family told Closer plainly that he'll be 13 next year, so they believe he's ready, as though there's a fixed age at which the training has to intensify. Regardless of how the individual child feels about it, nobody's applying that same clock to Charlotte or Louis. Their 13th birthdays, whenever they arrive, won't come loaded with the same institutional urgency. There's an added layer worth noting here too, because it changes the emotional texture of this whole transition. Even at the level of everyday identity, the 3 kids have quietly kept themselves separate from their titles. At Lambrook, none of them go by Prince or Princess at all. Instead, they're known simply as George Wales, Charlotte Wales, and Louis Wales to their school friends, a nod to their parents' titles rather than their own. That's been true for all 3 since they enrolled, and it's meant to give them something like ordinary childhoods inside an extraordinary family. Once George moves to Eton, though, that anonymity gets harder to maintain. Eton is a school with centuries of royal association built into its name, and George won't be able to disappear into the student body the way he could at a small Berkshire prep school with his siblings running interference beside him. So this is the moment the differences stop being personality quirks and start being lived reality. George is heading somewhere alone into an institution built for exactly the role he's training for. Charlotte gets to stay home and keep running her household the way she always has, likely stepping into more of a caretaking role for Louis in George's physical absence for the first time. And Louis, still the family's youngest and most protected, gets to keep being a kid at Lambrook a little while longer, insulated from the pressure that's about to land on his older brother in a completely new way. Which leaves one final question hanging over all of this. Because differences on a balcony are one thing, but differences that determine where you sleep at night, who you see every day, and what's expected of you before you're even a teenager are something else entirely. The question isn't whether these 3 kids are different anymore. It's what happens to that difference once the shared childhood that's held them together finally splits apart. By the time this September comes around, the picture the last 4 years have been building finally becomes physical fact. George starts at Eton. Charlotte and Louis stay at Lambrook, 1 grade apart, walking the same halls they've walked since they were small. For the first time in either of their lives, they'll go to school without their older brother somewhere in the building. What's striking, looking back over everything that's led to this point, is how consistently each child's public role has tracked with a private trait that's been visible for years. George's growing self-possession, the quiet asking of pointed questions to veterans, the readiness to sit beside his father at formal events rather than his siblings, wasn't manufactured for the cameras. It's the same conscientious, responsibility-absorbing temperament that child psychologists flagged as typical of firstborns groomed from birth to lead. Charlotte's habit of correcting her brother's posture on a palace balcony is the exact same instinct that makes her, in her mother's words, the one in charge of movie nights and pizza dinners at home. And Louis's fearless mugging for cameras in front of the entire Commonwealth is the same personality that has him burying his face in stuffed toys at bedtime rather than reading quietly like his sister or building with blocks like his brother. None of that happened by accident, and none of it happened because William and Kate treated their kids identically and hoped for variety. Every royal source who's spoken about the family's parenting approach circles back to the same idea: deliberate, individualized attention layered on top of very different birth order pressures. That's the actual mechanism behind the differences this video set out to explore. It isn't that three siblings randomly turned out unlike one another. It's that one of them was always going to be king. One of them was always going to be the family's middle child stabilizer. And one of them was always going to be the baby with nothing to prove. And every appearance, every school choice, every balcony moment for the last several years has simply been that structure playing out in public, one fly past at a time. That doesn't mean the three of them are strangers to each other, and it's worth being honest about that before closing this out. The same Louis who mimics George's expressions on a balcony is the same Louis who runs to Charlotte for a hug when he's overwhelmed. The same Charlotte who corrects her brothers in front of thousands of onlookers is also, by every account from people who've actually worked inside that household, protective of both of them in ways that never make the papers. And George, for all the weight being loaded onto his shoulders as he prepares to leave the house they've shared since 2022, was still the one seen quietly laughing at his little brother's antics at Trooping the Color this summer, before catching himself and straightening back into the posture everyone expects of him now. That's really the answer underneath all of this. The three of them are different, genuinely, observably, structurally different, in ways that show up in their school choices, their public roles, and the specific things adults around them have decided to nurture in each one. George is being built for a throne. Charlotte has built herself into the family's quiet authority. Louis gets to be the joy nobody's asking him to suppress. But those differences were never a sign of distance between them. If anything, they're the reason the three of them fit together as well as they do. Each one filling a role the others simply weren't built to hold. In a household that seems to have understood, earlier than most families ever do, that raising three very different children well doesn't mean raising them the same. What comes next is the part nobody can script for them. George walks into Eton this September carrying a surname that isn't really his own and a job description centuries in the making. Charlotte steps up at Lambrook without her older brother to correct anymore, at least for now. And Louis, still just 8, gets a little more time before anyone starts asking what he's supposed to become. 3 kids, 3 very different daily lives to match them. Marie Claire. Prince George marks his final first day of school at Lambrook. Good Morning America. Prince William and Kate's 3 kids. What to know. Hello Magazine. Significant change made at Lambrook School. Hello Magazine. First day of school photos. Marie Claire. Prince George's secondary school move tougher for him. Hello Magazine. Why the royal children don't use titles at school. Yahoo. Why the royal siblings are banned from titles at school. AOL. Start new school year before a major change. Cheat sheet. Body language expert on personality differences. Marie Claire. Former nanny shares secrets about the children. Marie Claire. Practical Charlotte is the opposite of cheeky Louis. Marie Claire, royal expert on Charlotte and Louis's natural ease. Hello Magazine, Prince George's leadership tendencies at home. Marie Claire, Charlotte and Louis can share the burden as spares. Yahoo, Princess Charlotte's personality is pure Kate Middleton. Yahoo, William and Kate acutely aware of challenges facing Charlotte and Louis. Yahoo, why Prince George is seen more publicly. AOL, Prince Louis steals spotlight at 2026, Trooping the Color. She knows. Prince Louis stole the show at Trooping the Color 2026. Fox News, Prince Louis goes viral again with hysterical antics. Fox News print. Prince Louis goes viral again. Fox News. Prince Louis steals the show during Trooping the Color. Press reader. Cheeky Louis was on a complete sugar high. AOL. Prince Louis is going viral again for latest Trooping the Color. Marie Claire. Prince George is now expected to appear at significant events. The Royal Observer. Real shift underway with Prince George. Yahoo, Prince George getting lessons for future king responsibilities. Yahoo, future monarch Prince George has major royal first. Yahoo, Prince William's careful plan to prepare Prince George. AOL, Prince George 12 shows first sign of future role. https://www.aol.com Prince George 12 shows first 132,439,907.html.